Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat a little bit about what I thought the take-homes were from the Dr. Mike and Menno keto diet debate the other day. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And you know, what I thought was interesting, oftentimes when we get into this whole evidence-based thing, as I kind of point out in the Q&As this last week, a lot of times the guys who are involved, they're so focused on the details that they miss the big picture. They don't even get stuff like basic training programming because they get so caught up in the nonsense of ineffective exercises and trying to pick out of all the most terrible exercises they can find which ones stimulate a certain muscle fiber maybe the most. And other such nonsense without really understanding the practicality of a lot of this and how to actually apply it and get results in people. And there's a lot of that out there, and people need to remember that oftentimes these are just academic debates. They're not really intended for the layman. They're not intended for any of you who are trying to get results, right? They're arguing points of academia. I felt in this one, though, there was really a lot of talk of applying these little tidbits of information and points of contention in science and applying them in real people. And I appreciated that is more or less the direction a lot of that went, because we don't always see that in these debates, and I actually appreciated that. And it was between two guys who are pretty knowledgeable. I mean, Dr. Mike, extremely knowledgeable guy. You guys know that. I don't necessarily agree with everything that he says. I think there are some points of contention I have with him, but for the most part, I consider him to be an extremely credible source of training and even nutrition information. And most of you guys know that I definitely use him as a resource. Then you have Menno, who I don't really follow as much because of some stuff early on. I think he got into a bunch of silly stuff of trying to separate size and strength and not understanding big lifts. And I still think the guy has a really small back, in spite of his argument he got into with me on Facebook when he was talking about 100-pound rows being heavy and all that nonsense. And I'm like, dude, that's girl weight. Like, girls do rows with 100 pounds, like drug-free girls. So, yeah, of course you ended up with a girl's back when you were doing 100-pound rows. Oh, a 400-pound deadlift. There are girls who deadlift 400 pounds, right? This is not anything to be impressed about. That's why you don't have a back. But that was a different point, and I left that alone because actually the guy's put out a lot of really good material over the years since that little debate on my wall, on my fan page. But he actually has become really what I would consider a very credible source of information in spite of that, right? So I get props for that. But what was interesting, I think they talked a lot about bulking in the keto thing, of gaining muscle in a ketogenic diet. And what I thought was interesting, Menno presented a really good case that, yes, it is possible to see nearly the same muscle growth on something like a targeted ketogenic diet, right? But you guys need to understand, when you're dealing with a targeted ketogenic diet, we're getting into more and more complexity. And I think he presented that it's possible. People have done it. He's had clients do it. He's known athletes who do it, who do more of a targeted style ketogenic diet, and others who do like a cycling ketogenic diet who do gain very large amounts of muscle. They do get results doing it. And he presented a good case for that in the sense that he did point out that it appears that up to a certain threshold, insulin is very anabolic to muscle tissue, but maybe not beyond a given threshold, right? And that we don't necessarily need maximum glucose stores for training because weightlifting itself just simply doesn't burn that many calories. Now, the point of contention I do want to make with a lot of that, I've seen some debates recently in different circles, even Dr. Brad saying, hey, you know, lifting weights and getting stronger and blah, 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 doesn't, and muscle mass doesn't put that much extra energy into your energy turnover, and I disagree. I'm sorry. You've got to wonder who these people are working with, because I know for myself, I know for other lifters, other athletes out there, once you start getting close to like a 500-pound squat, your energy turnover and your maintenance starts to become enormous. Like the average person can't even comprehend what your maintenance calories start looking like, even if you don't do any conditioning work or cardio. And I mean, it's myself, other people I know, that's one of the things I've noticed. You start getting up near a 500 squat. Or like when I was doing Bulgarian training, my maintenance calories were over 4,000. People are like, well, how did you bulk? Because I ate like 6,000 calories. And I just ate that because I didn't track. It's easy for me to eat that much. So a little side note there. Just in my experience, when your big lifts start getting really strong and your muscle mass starts going up, your energy intake becomes enormous. Your maintenance calories become enormous. You don't have a maintenance calories of 2,800 calories anymore when you're squatting 500, even when you're doing fairly low volume with no cardio. It's just been my experience. So maybe I've got to wonder who they're messing with as far as athletes go. But he does raise the point that the lifting itself doesn't burn that many calories. And even though it's taking it all from glucose, most of the time, I mean, in all honesty, how many calories of carbs do you really need to fuel a big workout? 100, 200? I mean, you have to be training pretty hard to burn 200 calories lifting weights. Actual calories from the weightlifting itself, not the rest in between sets. From the actual training itself, I mean, 200 calories, and that's what, 50 grams of carbs? That's a lot. Like, you have to train really hard to get that. A lot of it, in my experience, seems to be just overall change in metabolism, maybe the epoch, which, again, we can argue about how high it is. But he did raise a valid point there. He did raise a valid point. And even if we're talking about epoch and energy turnover and changes in metabolic rate from the muscle you gain or the heavy lifting, that could be fat calories. That doesn't have to be glucose. So he raised a very valid point with that. And I'll give credit for that. I think he presented that really well, and he did use different people he knows as real life examples, name some people. But what I will point out, though, a lot of people, you have to remember, who do call themselves ketogenic dieters are not really doing keto. I mean, the perfect example, Jamie Lewis, right? Jamie Lewis, one of the most well-known, strongest guys out there. One of the strongest guys out there who promotes ketogenic diets. I mean, and Jamie's a beast. Jamie is an absolute beast. But Jamie eats like 400 or 500 grams of protein a day. There's no way you're staying in ketosis when you're eating 400 or 500 grams of protein a day, and he carbs up on the weekends still. So you see the problem there with that? He's still carbing on the weekends, and he's eating 500 grams of protein. It's not really a ketogenic diet at that point. It really isn't. It's a low-carb diet most of the week, but it's like a cycling, high-protein, high-fat ketogenic diet. We're falling away from what people are thinking of as actual ketosis. He's not going to be in ketosis doing that. So we kind of get into the question that Dr. Mike points out, but why though? Yes, you can pull this off, but what's the point? What benefit do you think you're going to get? Meaning you're adding a lot of complexity, you're limiting food selection, everything else for no benefit. It's not like keto has any magical body fat burning properties. It's purely a diet adherence thing, and that same diet adherence, when you're trying to gain muscle, you're going to be overeating anyways. If you just pick higher satiety carbs, most people, in his experience, a lot of guys bulking because energy turnover gets so high have to start adding fat to their diet just to reach their caloric needs. They can't do it off carbs and protein. That's one reason you always see guys like Dr. Mike advocating just changing food sources on a bulk and a cut. In other words, bulking, eat the full fat yogurt, drink the whole milk, and when you're cutting, go to the fat-free versions, because that alone, while eating the same food volume and same flavors of foods, go from, fatty cuts of steak to lean cuts of steak, back and forth between bulking and cutting. And keeping your carbs fairly constant can actually work. You're getting similar food volumes, you're just changing your fat content to increase calories or not. That's one of the reasons he advocates that for a lot of people who don't necessarily have the insane appetites. Now, those of us with an insane appetite, we can bulk on ultra high carb with very little fat. I have no problem doing that. In fact, for me to even feel full, I pretty much need to do intermittent fasting even when I'm eating really fibrous carbs all day long. For me, just to get a smaller feed window so that I feel full. So different people have different appetites. But the point that he made is that it seems like a lot of complexity for no benefit. And at the end of the day, there's still reason to think that higher insulin response, higher insulinogenic foods are going to produce a larger anabolic response in the muscle tissue. They are. This is one of the big myths that's out there, and it's because people have insulin resistance, they get ultra-high elevated insulin levels. People need to understand insulin is insanely anabolic in conditioned muscle tissue. It's extremely anabolic, and he argued that it's at least as anabolic as testosterone is, right? He's argued, and I think he presents a good case when you look at bodybuilders, that it's just as anabolic. That bodybuilders have, again, doubled in size in their world just by adding insulin instead of just the steroids. Like they gained a massive amount of muscle just from abusing the androgen receptor for decades. And then when they throw insulin into the mix with it, they've, again, doubled the amount of extra muscle they had, again, over naturals. So his argument based on that is that it seems to be extremely anabolic. And what people need to understand, very conditioned athletes don't have dangerously high levels of insulin in their body as a result of carb loading. They don't. but they are getting more circulating insulin, but it's not due to insulin resistance, and it's not going to cause insulin resistance in them. It's more anabolic. He also pointed out that there's a lot of evidence suggests that full glycogen stores actually speeds up recovery. And if you're speeding up recovery, right, here's the point. If you're speeding up recovery, you can train harder and more often and stimulate more adaptation, more muscle growth. So it is a big deal, even if there isn't like a direct, well, you're guaranteed to gain more muscle from more carbs than fat at a certain point. If it's allowing you to recover faster, not necessarily just training fuel, but faster recovery, that will allow you to train with higher weekly workloads. Well, that matters in the long term. That's going to matter a lot for the amount of muscle mass that you gain. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I think they both really presented good points. But when I really listened to it, I've got to throw the win to Dr. Mike. And it's not that Menno isn't right about a lot of the finer points there. It's that at the end of the day, your potential for hypertrophy is potentially greater on higher carbohydrates. As Dr. Mike pointed out, it's potentially higher. You're going to be allowed a wider variety of food sources. You're going to have a wider variety of nutrients, and it's just not as difficult or complex to work out. You're not having to go, oh man, I'm going to have to do a targeted ketogenic diet and do these different strategies. It removes the need for all of that. So you're getting a degree of complexity to make the keto diet that may still have less potential for total muscle growth in the long term, right? You still might have less potential with no benefits. There's actually no benefits to it. And that's kind of the take home that I think won it for Dr. Mike, is that there are no benefits to the keto versus the higher carb, and the higher carb is still going to be slightly less complex with, again, the potential in the right training environment to yield more results. Not guaranteed to, but it gives you the potential to. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.